Hello, hello. Sorry to break up the music. It sounded nice, but I know we have other things to do tonight. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You can't see yourselves. I can't see you either, but I can tell you by looking at these numbers that it's an excellent audience. It's really wonderful to be able to share with such a large group of people. So thank you very much for tuning in and welcome to Movie Night. My name is Samuel George. I'm a documentary filmmaker with the Bertelsmann Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization based here in Washington, D.C. And along with the New York University John Bradamus Center and DC Legacy Project, it's our pleasure to be with you this evening. This is the online premiere of Berry Farm, Community, Land, and Justice in Washington, D.C. We've had a chance to show this film a few times around Washington, D.C., and we've just been blown away by the reaction, the desire of folks to have the history of Washington, D.C. and the history of this community, Berry Farm, told on a broader level and on a deeper level. So we're happy to be able to then bring that online and hopefully bring some more folks into that discussion. And that's just what we're here to do tonight. After the film screening, we will be having a discussion. The film is an hour long. And then we're going to come back with you with the film's co-director, Dr. Sabiyha Prince, and with New York University and Washington, D.C.'s academic fellow and part-time lecturer, Vicky Kiechel. And we're going to talk it over. And I remind you, this is a live event, which means we'd love you to be a part of it. And if you get your questions in the Q&A box, we'd love to address those as well. So now it's my great pleasure to bring in the fantastic co-director of this film to give you a little bit, set the stage, let's say, for what we're going to be watching tonight. So it's my great pleasure to bring in Dr. Sabiyha Prince. Please.
Thank you so much, Sam. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are, as Sam said, deeply excited, deeply honored to be able to share our work with such a wide audience wherever you are located in the United States and perhaps even beyond that. Thank you so much. And thank you first and foremost to the NYU Bradamus Center. You guys have done so much to promote this work and to get it out there. We deeply appreciate all the work that you've put into this, making this evening possible. Thank you to my co-director, Sam George. You just met him. He's a lovely, generous guy, a wonderful artist, and we've put this together for you along with the DC Legacy Project Steering Committee and our larger advisory board, who we've really worked together. And thank you so much to the Bertelsmann Foundation. This is truly a collaborative effort. Without the help of these nonprofits and without the cooperation of the people of Berry Farm, we would have absolutely nothing to share with you. So we really want to say thank you to everyone who's participated in this. This film is in honor of former and recent residents of Berry Farm who were displaced as early as 2019 and up into 2020. This is in honor of them. And I won't give any spoilers. I want you guys to see it, and then we're going to have a conversation. I think the main thing to know is that with this film, as Sam said, we are uplifting a history. We are uplifting a people's experience. And this is a living history. History continues with us. So folks are working hard to be able to come back when the property is redeveloped. They want to come back to their homes and continue to build community. And you're going to get a chance to see how strong and how powerful this community has been over the decades and indeed centuries. So with that, we're going to bring you the film now. So thank you very much. And we look forward to speaking with you afterwards.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's nothing like riding out on the fantastic Junkyard Band. Folks in Washington, D.C. and folks beyond Washington, D.C. if you have a chance to go see the Junkyard Band, whether you've seen them before or you haven't, please go do it, because it's a really powerful experience, a fantastic experience. And it's something that's now, as you see in the film, that's been part of Washington, D.C. for decades. So definitely check them out. Thank you so much for joining us for movie night. I can just say, as part of the team behind this film, we're so thankful. You see all the people that took time to be a part of this film and opened up their mind, their heart, their soul, and shared their experience. And so it's wonderful that then folks like you out there tune in and watch it, because then you feel like you're sharing something. So thank you for that. And it's my pleasure to bring in our two panelists tonight for this conversation. Of course, we're live, so be sure to drop your questions in the question and answer button on the Zoom. We have Dr. Sabiyha Prince. Dr. Sabiyha Prince, we co-directed this film together. Dr. Prince is a cultural anthropologist. She's an artist. She's a scholar. She's been writing about and researching African-American life and culture for over 2 decades. She's the founder and senior researcher at Anthrodocs, a qualitative research firm based in Washington, D.C. Definitely want to check out her books. They include Constructing Belonging, African Americans and Gentrification in Washington, D.C., and Capital Dilemma, which she worked on with Dr. Derek Hyra, also a friend of the Bertelsmann Foundation. Sabiyha, worth pointing out, that was also her art in the film. That was her voice and narration. So really somebody that just a very wide array of artistic and academic skills that really made this film what it is. And then also we're very happy to have commenting tonight Professor Vicky Kiechel. Vicky Kiechel, she is affiliated with New York University. She's a practicing architect and native Washingtonian. She teaches at American University. Some of her very popular courses include Global Environmental Politics program it is. What she really tries to do with her work is bring in real world examples, talk about sustainable design, take things down to a local level. So we're definitely looking forward to her commentary on this film. But if I could, I'd love to start with co-director Dr. Sabiyha Prince. Sabiyha, this was your idea, this film. Why did you want to make this film?
Well, I can't take full credit for that. I think it really emerged out of the Empower DC activism. Empower DC is the grassroots organization that sponsors and, in a sense, gave birth to the DC Legacy Project. And they have been active as organizers in the Berry Farm community for over a decade, for many, many years. So my interest was really sparked by that activism. And, I've just always been so blown away by this history. Once I had the privilege to finally learn about it, mind you, I'm a native Washingtonian. I didn't become familiar with it until, much later in life, again, through my activism with Empower DC. So, we want to share that. We wanted to share that history, and it's also a part of activism that is taking place right now with former residents who are fighting to come back, and also other former or current public housing residents across Washington, D.C. who are facing similar future of maybe being displaced. So it all emerged out of all that kind of activism.
It must feel special in a unique kind of way to make this about a city that you grew up in, and to learn something new, and at the same time to tell a story of what's your hometown. I know that's not a specific question, but I'd love to, if you want to reflect on that. And then here is a specific question for you. You are somebody with experiences in so many different kinds of art forms, from writing, from academic writing to painting, photography, musician, singing. What was your experience as a filmmaker? What surprised you about that? What did you learn about that medium? Did you enjoy it? Did it feel like something new? Were you able to bring in talents from other things?
Well, I'm addicted now, Sam. I mean, you've completely brought out the monster in me. I have to make another film.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an anthropologist and I'm used to telling stories, If we're doing our job, that's basically what we're doing, telling stories well and also putting them within a context so that people can understand how things happen. And being able to work with you, and you being so generous and so good at what you do. I mean, every time I look at this film, I get emotional. And a part of it I feel is the music. The music is very well placed and it really tugs at your heartstrings. And I do feel like it is a part of a story that I am connected to, whether, I did not grow up in Berry Farm. I did not grow up in Southeast or grow up in public housing, but I am a product of the Great Migration. And so I envision my grandparents and all the different things that they had to go through. And I've heard from folks who've seen this film, and I can tell you that it means a lot, you know. And of course, we did not tell every story. It is not perfect. There's more that we could have said. Um, but I've talked to so many people who feel seen.
Yes.
uh, Washingtonians feel seen, and we need to feel seen because, as you know, far too often our lives are in the shadows of these federal institutions and
Mm.
these glorious, buildings, and our stories are not told by us, you know. And so I feel extremely honored to be able to make this contribution to telling the story of my fellow Washingtonians, particularly my African American brothers and sisters, with the help of so many other people, the DC Legacy Project, the historians, the other artists, the photographers, you know, so many people contributed. I won't even start running down the names, but we got to see them during the credits, and maybe some others who weren't mentioned. So it's an honor,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to be able to participate in this art form.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And you mentioned names. There was one I meant to say in the top, and that's Polly Terzian, who Polly stays behind the scenes in these collaborations with the NYU Bradamus Center, but she is integral in pulling these events together. And I wanted to say that name and say thank you to
Yes.
her because it's wonderful. I see all these questions and answers coming in, that you're going to make my job very easy. That's wonderful. We're going to get to these questions as soon as we can. There's one more I wanted to ask you, Sabiyha. And that was, I thought this was such a pivotal time for us to do this documentary because the future has yet to be written. So much of the gentrification of Washington, D.C., there's already so many things that have become ingrained. At this point, the homes of the Berry Farm dwellings, most of them have been knocked down, except for the ones that, as we saw, the activists were able to preserve. What comes next? Um, that we don't know yet, and that's why I felt like it was important to do this documentary at this moment. Can you maybe update folks on where we stand at Berry Farms, and
Yes.
why this was the right time to make this documentary?
Sure, I can do my best. I think there are other people that probably could do a better job than I, but I do want to use this moment to also direct people, and I'll put it in the chat, to the DC Legacy Project, which is an organization you can follow. We have a website, and it's www.dclegacyproject.org. Again, I'll put it in the chat. And you can keep up with what's going on there. We have a mobilizing event that's going to take place this coming weekend on the 24th at the Thurgood Marshall Academy and I will find this address, it's 2427 MLK Avenue in Southeast DC. It's going to be at 1:30, and we're going to gather so you can learn more about the history and get some updates as to what's going on right now. We are in process. Just so you know, I did have a chance to glance at some of the questions. I saw someone asked, how did this happen? How did those properties become public housing? And that was through eminent domain. That was how those homes were knocked down and the public housing got established there. And currently, a lot of those folks are now organized. As you could imagine, they're scattered all over the place. They're scattered all over DC and in the metropolitan area. And there are a strong cadre of people that are fighting to come back. And they are organizing and they are interfacing through the DC Legacy Project and other avenues with the developer. That the developer was given a lease by the city to develop those properties. And a lot of different things are planned, but based on what I understand, and that is through having a meeting just today with Daniel Del Pialago, who's the organizing director for Empower DC. He informed me that currently it's 78 properties of replacement units that are on the books to come back. And of course, 442 units were demolished. So, this is a period now where organizing really matters, where people speaking with one voice really matters, and where some compromises need to be made, and that's where whether we're talking about the DC Housing Authority, whether we're talking about the federal government, i.e. HUD, or whether we're talking about our mayor and our other elected officials. It's a time now to really get them on board with the desire to make sure these landmark buildings are protected and are in the public hands. We don't want to see a plaque on the ground. Something substantial has to happen, and we can work together to make that happen, because there are models all over the world of how historic preservation, right? So this work can be done, and we want to make sure that we have truly affordable housing, and we want to make sure that people can come back. So we're in the middle of that kind of work right now, and that's very detailed, layered.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Professor Kiechel, I'm so happy you were able to join us tonight. I just want to give you a chance to first kind of respond to the film. What did you think of the film? How did this fit into your area of expertise and what you try to teach?
I love your film. Sabiyha and Sam, it's awesomely powerful. You've done so well. Thank you. And making it visible. So one thing I teach about is this relationship of community and land and development. And a couple things I found really especially stood out to me about the film. Well, first of all, the most obvious point is just the variety of voices that you had in the film. And I know there was an early question about how you found all these people, but I was really struck by the balance of genders, the balance of ages, and the families' voices, talking about mothers, or, here's my father and I'm the son. And, so that those voices I thought were just also adding to the power. The fascinating narrative to me too was the narrative of the community over history. So if I could just sum it up. So it's a slave owning farm. That's how, or presumably indigenous land at some point. Then someone works the land with slaves, the berries. And then the Freedmen's Bureau comes along, they buy it, they offer it, and then you have a Black community that is coming in, building their own houses with their own hands, farming, making a whole livelihood there. So they're working, they're creating, a sort of a downtown. There's all that. And that continues. And then you have this eminent domain, right. World War II. It's like they need labor, Black labor, all sorts of labor. Presumably that was part of it. I don't really know. But so you have this taken, and then you have different livelihoods where people are actually, they're going out to work in the city, or maybe in the Navy Yard, or on Bolling Air Force Base, who knows. So then you also have this, you move into the 60s, and then you're like in this world of hurt with these people coming, and it's almost like they don't want you to work if you're there. It's like now suddenly those livelihoods, that whole working thing is gone. And then gradually this, neglect, dispossession by neglect. That whole narrative to me was powerful. One thing I'll say, and I think you ought to get to the questions, but I really am fascinated by the design of the 1940s Berry Farm as an architect, because they got a lot right. They're two-story houses, townhouses. They have these what's called super blocks, these big green areas between, some of which are backyards for people. They're very proud of that. But I mean, one gen in the beginning of the film, he called Berry Farm one big old grandma house.
Yeah, right.
And that is just like spatially, socially the idea that you can, if you're a kid, you just play there, the mothers, it's no wonder that activism kind of springs up from the spatial environment. I just thought that was really powerful. And then to see it go away, and I'm interested in seeing, so if they redevelop it, what are they going to put? Are they going to put higher rise stuff? Presumably, yes, denser, detached from the ground, maybe not as much green space. Part of the reason I think the community strengthened into activism was the spatial layout. So I love that. That was great.
Thank you very much, Professor. I know there's, when you do a documentary, the overwhelming majority of what you film, you don't use. You probably use less than 1%. But every once in a while, there's a moment that you're going to use. And that was when the member of the Junkyard Band referred to it as a big grandma's house. Sabiyha and I remember both looked at each other and was like, yeah, I think he just got it in a word. My last question for you, Professor, before we move on to our audience questions is how can we, so you said we don't know what's going to come next. And again, I think that's why this is an important documentary for this moment. What, in your sense, could come next that, there's right answers and wrong answers? What are some things that would be indicative to you that the city is doing this right? And what would be telling you that they're doing it wrong?
Well, that's a great question. I wish they'd involve the displaced people in the redesign. That's one thing that they could kind of do right. I know that, there at least one person said they ought to build it back as it was. I don't know about that. I'm not a nostalgic person in general, but that is one sort of solution. You've seen this in other cities where they wipe away, areas that were actually functioning really pretty well, and then they end up building them back. I think to get it right, they should talk to residents. It'll be a messy process. It'll take time. The other thing that I think, and one man raised this in the film, is really looking at, they're trying to do mixed income, and it looks like a lot of market rate housing.
Right.
He made the point,
Yes.
Median income is 59,000.
Outrageous.
Doesn't know anyone that makes that. If you look at median income, if the city could set median income in Ward 8 instead of like citywide or even Anacostia wide, that might sort of lower that threshold. We have this amazing median income level for a family of 4. It is outrageous.
Yeah.
And you've got like median household income in Anacostia in general, 23,000. In Ward 3, it's like 150,000 or something crazy. So what do you do with that? So I think looking at income levels, engaging the residents, accepting that it will be a messy process, but I also want to know, where are these folks now?
Yeah.
Where are they housed? Where are the displaced?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that can actually be a great way for us to lead into the questions from the audience. Because one thing Amanda Koger was wondering, and thank you for the compliments as well. We see those and we appreciate those. How did the team go about facilitating the resident stories? And because in finding those stories, we got to see sort of where people ended up. Sabiyha did a lot of the legwork, tracking down and preparing those interviews. So how did you do that?
That was through the team. That wasn't just me. Again, Empower DC has pre-existing relationships. You cannot say enough about relationships, right? You don't have to make up anything. You don't have to fake the funk. It's already there. It's real, and it's been sustained for a period of time. So Sarah Schoenfeld, who was central, she was in the film, and she gave me a lot of contact. She did a lot of legwork. She saw something in the paper with Dr. Judy Fisher. And, we got in touch with her through Cortland Malloy at the Washington Post. A lot of them are pre-existing relationships that Parisa Neruzzi and again, Daniel DePalago already have. So we just capitalized on that. I have to thank you, Professor, for your comments, though. I just have to circle back to that very quickly, because it so deeply speaks to the work that people have been doing to advocate for larger units to replace what's there, or to have what was there be replaced. And that is not the plan, to do that. And there's so many reasons why that is important. And I love the way you made that connection with the activism. It's really connected to people's well-being, and their ability to form and sustain relationships with one another. And communal life is so valuable. And officials talk about how they are concerned about crime and they want to lower it, etc. And we know one of the surefire ways of lowering crime, in addition to getting rid of the guns and also making sure that people have proper mental health, care to deal with the trauma that they've experienced, is to pour into communities, not to stress communities out more, not to promote scarcity, and taking away funds, etc., but to actually pour into people and to help them to maintain the community ties that they already have, because that is going to go a very long way. And that's not a part of the plan currently. And it needs to be. And those are some of the things that people are fighting for, as well as the whole issue with the median income being so high.
Right.
And officials will tell you this is an issue, this is a structural issue, that it's a barrier. It's like it's an impasse of some sort. And I say, no, I don't accept that. If we can change policies, if we can have corporate welfare and give corporations a buck, to have some property for a few decades or so, surely we can come up with something that is going to subsidize people over a sustained period of time, so that they can not only have affordable housing, but also have opportunities to grow, opportunities to be homeowners, etc. Because a huge part of the context of this film is the structure, is what happened to the jobs, what happened to the environment. Why do you see these kind of shifts? It all occurs within a political and an economic and a historical context that we need to grapple with. And we should base our solutions in that context and be generous in this moment.
I think the only thing that I would add to that conversation is, I think that it opened my eyes, the kind of games that developers can potentially play, that they can go out there and say, oh, look, we have included a certain amount of low income housing. And then you look a little deeper, and the definition of low income housing is $60,000 a year. So they can use that's kind of the fishy language, or the wishy-washy language that let's one thing get reported and without having people return. And you say, where are these people now? We had to go all over the city and sometimes outside of the city. And that's just the problem, is that what was once a very strong community is no longer that community. People have been one person in this neighborhood, one person in that, this person in a third. Carrie Douglas has a couple really important questions. The first one I love, where can we see this one again? I'm going to drop some links in so you can know how to follow up for future screenings. The other thing I want to say is that both Dr. Prince and I, this is a nonprofit endeavor. DC Legacy Project and Bertelsmann Foundation, we're nonprofit organizations. We always want to share this film. If you have some people you think that would like to see it, contact us, and maybe we can put together a screening like this one. And then eventually it's going to be online for free. So I'll put in some links where you can follow up on that information. But Carrie is another thing that a lot of people ask. How did this happen? And we're talking about different periods in time. In the 1940s, how did the DC mayor's office allow this to happen? More recently, how were they able to sell this land? Was there no ownership rights by the people that lived here? So I'll pose that to both of you. And to what extent is the DC City Council responsible? How did they get away with this?
Sabiyha, do you want to take that? I mean,
well,
we've had mayors recently that have been very, invested in development and tax revenue, and I don't know.
Well, eminent domain. I mean, you don't have to explain much if it's something that's for the greater good. But talk about calling a thing a thing. What about white supremacy? You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Why couldn't African-American people live in different parts of the city? Because, as so clearly stated, white people did not want them in their neighborhoods. So that's a huge part of the context that already is going to limit people, as to where they're going to be able to set up shop. Not to say that Black folks don't mind being around each other and having community, but there was a limit as to where they could go. And so that's a huge part of the context. And as long as all the books haven't been banned yet, we can still read up on, the history, because that's a huge part of all this context of this, these conditions, is the racism.
Right.
Restrictive covenants were, I think in place until recently in a lot of neighborhoods where it's like, no, they weren't obeyed necessarily, but I think I read as recently as like 20 years ago, someone on a deed came across like nobody who's Black should be living in this house, basically. So, that kind of thing, yes, that persisted for years and years. And I understand the Anacostia neighborhood itself was very, white working class for, when it was Uniontown and, basically, way before Berry Farm, was established. So, yeah. But the zoning, Sam, you were referring to it. They call it the affordability, setting aside an affordable quote unquote part of your units is called inclusionary zoning, which is a total irony. It's not inclusionary. We're still using that language. Part of the problem, I think the city council and, we're kind of in this narrative, this imaginary of like inclusion, and yet it's not inclusionary. Someone needs to take a look at it. And I don't know what to say about developers and development. There's so much bad, there's some good. Yeah.
But you said the magic words. You said community-based and the messy process of folding in the viewpoints of residents. And that's the other thing that Empower DC is doing, and providing a space for people to come together, right? Because it's not the decision of organizers, and it shouldn't be the decision of developers. It should be the decisions of the people who are going to live there. They deserve for us to take the time and develop fresh, innovative models for interacting with them. Because we have to do this. We don't have a choice. We need to have equity, and we need to be aware, we need to have climate justice.
Right.
Those are the things that we should have our eyes on right now. It should not be an option to leave people behind in this process, but it's because, again, white supremacy. And let's also talk about the money, right? There are a lot of folks that are lining their pockets, and sometimes that comes before. But, if you have more people at the table, I guarantee we can do this, and we can expedite it, because there's a little bit of complaining on the part of some of the governmental folks about, development taking too long because of all these different forces having their input, et cetera. And it doesn't have to take long if the right decisions are made. We can expedite this.
Sabiyha, I think you're going to love this next comment, because it's one that we talked a lot about and we really thought a lot about when we were making it. It's from Crystal Okafor. She said, I appreciate the filmmakers changing the narrative about public housing from one on concentrated poverty, family dysfunction, the stereotypes that are associated with Berry Farm, specifically in public housing in general, and that we just found wasn't the case. It wasn't even necessarily that we set out to counter that. This is when you talk to people, it had nothing to do with their reality on the ground. First of all, thank you for that comment, because that was something we thought a lot about. And she says, what can we just teach us about the future of public housing, the nation at large? And I think we can combine that with Silvana Straw's question. She said, look, if you're a DC resident, how can we work together and use this film to create awareness about what's happening in these private sector decisions, and to fight for a better outcome for the residents and for the city?
Sure. Well, we're trying to get the film out there, and Sam and I, we are open. I've shown this film to 5 people. We've shown it to 300 people. So, you know, we're gonna ride it till the wheels fall off, just in terms of getting it out there before it gets online and everybody can see it. But we really want to get it out there. And I think all of us, we can start now by writing your elected official and saying, hey, you know, or even not your elected official, but folks who could be, you know, whoever you understand has power and influence. We saw this powerful film and, you know, and advocate for what should happen over there, because this is the outcome that we are fighting for. Again, the right to return and to get those landmark buildings protected and developed through community-based development. So please join us. You know, the DC Legacy Project, we have meetings, we have a website. You can go to the website, www.dclegacyproject.org, and you can join our contact list. You can contact Daniel Del Pelago at daniel@empowerdc.org. I will also put that in the chat, and reach out to him and ask him, hey, you know, how can I help you? Maybe you have some resources. Maybe you can volunteer. It is going to take collective effort, and it's going to take holding people accountable, and holding elected officials accountable works. I've seen it. You know, it doesn't work always when you want it and how you want it, but it can work. And the more the merrier. We welcome you in this work.
So we had initially said that we were going to go to 7:30. There's so many wonderful questions. With the permission of the panelists, maybe we push this another 10 minutes, if that's all right, and try to get to as many of these as we can. Maybe I'll just read a couple and give our panelists a chance to respond. Bruce, thank you for chiming in with the comment. Ask about the Anacostia Museum involvement. I know we did have one representative, Alcione Amos, was from the Anacostia Museum. Sabiyha, perhaps you could talk more about that. We're getting requests for your art, so be sure to also in this series of links, put a link where folks can check out your art and maybe find something that they can put up on their wall. You know, there's a lot of questions about this landmark status. Barbara asked about that. I know we had a couple more asking for the right of return. People want to know, Brian wants to know the status of the site now. So yeah, I think that's a good thing that we can talk a little bit about right now, because like I say, it's really at an inflection point. You know, a couple of the buildings have been saved. What will become of them? Well, that remains to be seen. And then there's a wide open field. It's almost like a blank canvas. So is there anything, I know we've talked about it some, and maybe we've already answered this, but is there anything you want to add to what's happening right now with that space?
Sure. What else I do know about it is that the first, you can go online, actually. The developer is the Preservation of Affordable Housing, which the acronym is POA, and they have a website. I hate to be promoting, that's not my role to be promoting them, but I guess just for transparency, you can go there and you can, you know, follow up on what some of those plans are. I believe the first building to be developed there is going to be senior housing. Which is of course very important, and would be a very small portion of what was demolished, and would bring back a very small portion of the people. But there is a plan to redevelop the property over the next, you know, I believe 8 to 10 years. And again, you can get more information on that from Empower DC, and you can get plans to see what the developer has in store. I would also say, just very candidly and respectfully, that the goal of the DC Legacy Project is to very kindly disrupt those plans, from the sense that, you know, we would like to advocate again for community-based development, and particularly to get control over those landmark buildings, to ensure that they're going to be a space for community upliftment, for the celebration of this history, and as a space for people to be able to come together, learn more, and improve their lives, and stay here in this city. And that doesn't even speak to the work for people who want to return, who were displaced from that space as well.
Yeah, and I'm just really intrigued by the use of preservation as an activism kind of hinge, that it's like, what's worth preserving? No one is like saying, oh, public housing is worth preserving, but yet they're going to historic preservation. They're totally disrupting that process too. They're successfully making the case, well, turns out most of it's demolished already, but that at least something of this is worthy of preservation. It's such a value judgment, historic preservation. I mean, it takes me back to, I mean, when they redeveloped Southwest DC in the 50s and 60s, they basically, it was the same time that Georgetown was going through historic preservation, being utterly preserved. It was a Black neighborhood there too, but it was mostly white. Southwest DC, mostly Black, some Irish, totally pancaked. You know, same kind of, you know, why is one preserved, not the other? I don't know.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
no,
there.
no, please, I'm done.
No,
Sam.
I was going to say it's one of the questions, and it's interesting to talk about it from Kaltemak. This idea of preservation as restorative justice. And Sabiyha, I know you and the team put so much work into making sure that those dwellings were not torn down, that they were preserved. And the comments is oftentimes we understand preservation from the top down, as in the state institutions trying to solidify a narrative, but that this is the story of preservation as a space of activism. And I think that's interesting. What do you have any thoughts on that? The idea of preservation as activism and an element of justice?
That's what I'm witnessing right now. And I really have to give a shout out to people like, again, Sarah Schoenfeld, Amber Wiley, Parisa Neruzzi, Daniel Del Pilato.
Definitely.
I'm the face that you guys are seeing right now. But in terms of that work, I, played a very small role. I mean, I testified before the board, the preservation board that made the decision. And, and I was very honored to do that. But that's what we're witnessing. And this is not historic preservation, is not my area. So I'm just getting introduced to this work. And it's very innovative. It's very, very progressive. And yes, I do understand that it's not the norm. In fact, sometimes historic preservation can result in people being displaced. It can put extra pressure on people to have to do different adjustments to their property, et cetera. And it also can attract people that have more money as property values begin to go up. That's a part of the displacement process, So yeah, I guess this is innovative, although you can probably find some other examples around the country.
I think Sharon makes a good point that we really need to look at this terminology, this affordable housing. I agree, completely relative, meaningless, and sometimes even counterproductive, because people can use it to mean something that people hear and think is something different. And she mentions living wage housing, maybe more accurate. I agree. Barbara says, get PBS to air this film. I agree with that one too, and we're working on it. And if anyone out there knows anybody at PBS, we'd love to work with them to show this film, and we're working very hard and hope to make that happen. Silvana, 78 replacement units out of 440 is shameful. I agree. That's another example of where they can say one thing and do another. If you do that, you can say, hey, we brought people back. Yeah, but how many? Deborah would like to bring up the idea of redlining. And I mean, that's so important, and I think not fully understood by folks. So maybe we could just, and I think I'm glad for that question, because a lot of times we have words that we know redlining is bad, but we don't necessarily, a lot of people might not know what that is. So how does that play into this story, and what are we talking about there?
I'll let the professor.
Yeah.
So redlining is the classic example that everyone uses is Chicago, where maps were drawn, where the red lines were around Black neighborhoods. And typically what it affects is it's things like financing for ownership, of housing. And it's like, if you're living in it's like, okay, this is, where you are, you can't kind of, it's the lower rent districts, it's the properties that aren't so, that aren't judged to be so valuable. And so, you're immediately, that's a form of dispossession because you're not allowing families to build up wealth in those properties. So redlining is this racially motivated mapping of cities. It's, if you're reading the classic essays on Chicago, like by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who, is sort of now, I think he went back to school at Howard, so maybe he's local now, but about the case for reparations, and based on this racial history of dispossession and lack of being able to build wealth in one's home. And in his case, this was a 2012 essay in The Atlantic. I think if you look up the case for reparations, you can find it. Very, very powerful. He's a man who writes with his fists, he's in there swinging. It really talks a lot about this, but also about how, people were sold properties that they didn't really own. And that's a whole nother kind of legacy of white supremacy and property ownership. Long answer, I apologize.
No. I mean, I think it's really important. And for me, so that was a big learning experience for me in this project, is the different eras and impacts of racist policy that impacts the development of city at different times in our country. So that when they decided they needed to build public housing, nobody wanted it, in these white neighborhoods. They didn't want it anywhere near us. So they went and disrupted what was a thriving Black community of home ownership. And that's why those houses were taken back and knocked over. And it was the same with the creation of the highways. There's some really powerful photos of that. So I think it's really incredibly important to talk about those things. So yeah, we're getting down towards the end. I'm going to ask another question, and then I'm going to give our panelists a chance for a final comment. I also want to apologize. It's just wonderful comments, and I know we haven't got to all of it. And I really appreciate you tuning in. And please do follow up with us. Let's keep sharing this film. Let's keep these conversations going. I appreciate this question from Mike Smith, because I think it really gets to the heart of the issue. What's happening in Berry Farm is happening all over America. Is there any effort to connect with other activist kind of organizations? And then the other one I wanted to bring in was Joseph Marcus says, and this I think is a really important question, because we've highlighted a problem now. And Joseph says, what amenities or spaces does the community need to maintain that culture? So we say, here's a culture that we risk losing. What do we need to maintain that culture and community norms? Because like he says, it's not just about disrupting physical space, it's all about interrupting these cultural norms and imposing these norms on these historical Black spaces. So how, I guess what the fundamental question there is, how can this be done right? What does Berry Farms need to continue to be the Berry Farms that people that love it know it as?
Honestly, I'll take that question, and I think it's really the former residents are the best people to answer that. As a person that's in my position, I'll just say, add my 2 cents to that. They need help. And what does that look like? It's a list. And I guess the best way to answer that is to understand what's been taken from them. People have lost community. They've lost connection. That can lead to all sorts of alienation. I've talked to former residents, sometimes with tears in their eyes and in mine, as they shared what it's like to be dislocated, what it's like to have your mom across the street from you, what a resource that is, right? I mean, the resource that is community is immeasurable. It cannot be quantified, and I've said this before, so forgive me if people have heard me speak when I talk about people that share groceries, people that take their fellow neighbors somewhere, give them a bit of change when they need it, be a shoulder to lean on, to crack up and hang out and have barbecues with, and what all that does, as well as the political power that can also be represented. So people need an assortment of resources right now, whether it's related to childcare, related to health, but related to spaces again in time, so that they can meet and strategize and have some doors open to the decision makers, and so they can converse and engage with them and be listened to and be respected. These things are not fanciful. That's what needs to happen. And in terms of the national and the making connections, that is so important. I think oftentimes, particularly, you can get mired in the local, and the work is very hard, right? I mean, you don't want to just work. You also want to have a work-life balance, enjoy yourselves and do all the different things that folks do. But, the National Public Housing Museum is based out of Chicago, and that's a national group. And we're in the process of having conversations with them, and they're having some of the same concerns, and they want to amplify some of these stories and experiences. So I think amplifying these things beyond the local would probably be a very strategic and important thing that we should be doing.
Natasha Corley writes, why can't they just rebuild it and let the residents back in, right? I mean, that's really, we're with you on that one. And, this is so cool. Dr. Janelle Drone chiming in from Huntsville, Texas. That's so cool for us because we've been showing this film around DC. And so it's wonderful to be able to share this. And she talks about how she learned about DC's role in desegregating schools. It's Burnley Elementary. Is that correct, Sabiyha? Is that the name of the school? And it wasn't in Berry Farm. It was right there, and the students weren't allowed to go there. And that was a very important part of the Supreme Court cases. I want to wrap up and give each panelist a chance to let us know what's next for you. Where can we find your work going forward? And I think, what's on my mind, just looking at that comment from Texas, how does this play into a national story? I mean, this is more than Washington, D.C. This is going on in cities across the country. So maybe you guys would like to give a final comment.
I always looking for ways to create communities of practice, right? Across cities. I think a city-to-city connection, in my case, is kind of where I'm going with activism, and because that I do think the local level is great. And then can these issues of kind of housing and destruction and preservation, can they be foregrounded by environmental justice organizations, by certainly they are by civil rights organizations to an extent, but it is part of this larger social issue. So yeah, working on that is important.
Dr. Prince,
Yeah.
I want to read one more prompt before hearing yours, because I think this is I think you'll appreciate hearing this from Silvana. She writes, psychological, spiritual, cultural displacement on top of physical displacement. Love the comments about need for more spaces for longtime DC residents to convene, organize, have concerts, stay together. So I just wanted to give you that additional prompt for you.
Yeah, you're feeling me. They're feeling me out there. Yes, I think that I would end on, Stam, you made a film about Florida and Liberty City. And so there were some similar themes that came out there. There's Weeksville in Brooklyn. I mean, all over our country, you see the remnants of these communities that really are testaments to resilience, if there are any remnants at all, because of the horrors that have been visited upon Black people and the destruction, that has been visited upon our communities. Communities have been burned to the ground. People have had to move around, for such a long time. It's an unacknowledged, perhaps, part of the history. I mean, now everybody's learned about Tulsa, which is good, but let's multiply that by, whatever number, because that's not the only one. So I think I'm interested in, again, calling a thing, because I think that's how we learn, and that's how we can foster change. And so what African Americans have experienced, which I think this is, symbolic of, emblematic of, if you will, the impacts of corruption, of dispossession, of robbery. Dr. Andrew Perry was with the Brookings Institution when he wrote this 2017 study that said that African Americans have been robbed of 156 billion through asset devaluation. So, I'm a big proponent for reparations. I think that's one of the many things that needs to happen. And not solely because of the trillions in today's dollars that were accumulated based on the backs of our ancestors through enslavement, but also through modern day housing policies and modern day forms of discrimination. And now what I'm somewhat not with or not supportive of are solutions that are kind of like usually trickle down or kind of giving secondary benefits to African Americans as opposed to giving direct benefits. The impacts of redlining have been very destructive. Let's fix that. Let's address that, and you don't address that by giving handouts to incentives to a corporation. That's not how that should work. That is actually somewhat disrespectful, right? So those are some of the things that I'm fighting for and that I enjoy having conversations with and actually looking at the experts in that, because there's lots of policies about things that we can do to make it right, because an injustice has been done.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Prince, I appreciate the reference to the Liberty City documentary. Yes, I put the link to that film. Again, all our films are free and online. And that's an interesting to watch precisely because of these similarities. A public housing complex built in the same decade, similar kind of construction and similar kind of issues going on now. So that just evidences the systemic nature of some of the things we've been talking about. Folks, you've been a wonderful audience. You really have. You see how many people have stuck with for this conversation. You made my life easy with all those questions, really wonderful questions. Again, apologies to the ones I didn't get to. I hope you come back and we can do this some more. So
can we capture those, Sam? Excuse my interruption. Can we capture those?
At the very least, I can do a screenshot. At the very least, I can do a screenshot. And 2.5, 3 years into this era we're in, I still don't quite know how to. I don't control Zoom. It controls me. I can do some things, but yeah, we can definitely hold on to these. And just as a reminder, tonight we've been hearing from Professor Vicky Kiechel of American University and New York University in DC. And her courses are the Global Environmental Politics program, really combining real world, local projects, sustainable design, architecture kind of thing. So definitely check her work out. And of course, the fantastic Dr. Sabiyha Prince, cultural anthropologist, artist, documentary filmmaker, scholar, you name it. It was a pleasure and honor to work on this project with her. My name is Samuel George. I'm with the Bertelsmann Foundation. I hope you guys take a moment to note those links because we'd love to keep this conversation going. And a major thank you to the Bradamus Center, to the NYU Bradamus Center, who's consistently been a fantastic partner for these kind of dialogues. So with that, I want to wish everybody a wonderful evening, and I hope we get to talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Great talking with you both.
Thank you.